Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Glasgow. It's a huge pleasure to welcome you all here today, particularly to see our sustainable classroom, but perhaps even more importantly, to spend some time thinking and talking about something incredibly important inside this new semi-building. We're half outside here. Those of you who are watching online, it's really cold. You might see people putting their coats on. We are here for a Teach the Teacher session, and the idea of this is that we want to spend some time listening to the voices of those who are perhaps a little bit younger than I am about how they'd like to be taught and to think about climate change and sustainability in the future. We are really committed to making sure that all of the 16 million people who are in education at the moment in this country are able to be taught really well about the challenges of climate and sustainability. We absolutely ensure through the national curriculum that people are taught as part of geography, as part of science, and as part of citizenship. But we know that teachers want us to continue to make sure we can help with really good quality resources to make sure that they can have those conversations as well as possible. And today we're going to do something a bit different, a little bit exciting, which is to ask two young people to teach the teacher, to give us a lesson. Now, this isn't something the Department for Education has prepared. It's something we're here to listen to. And I'm going to hand over, without further ado, to Jodie and Phoebe, who are going to give us a lesson that we're going to attend to here in Glasgow, but also in schools up and down the country that have tuned into this session today. So Jodie and Phoebe, without further ado, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Phoebe. I'm from the West Midlands. I'm from Staffordshire in the UK, and I'm a student at Lancaster University. I'm studying politics.
Yep, I'm Jodie. I'm 17. I'm currently in year 13, so I'm going to be joining Phoebe at university soon, applying for earth sciences. So a bit similar to some of the climate change, climate science things that you'll be hearing from us today.
So a month or so ago, we ran a wonderful campaign called Teach the Teacher, which is part of the organisations that we represent, which are called mock COP26. So when COP26 was supposed to happen last year, we ran a youth version of it. We ran an online version that engaged over 800 young people from over 140 different countries. And there's also a campaign called Teach the Future, also run by SOS UK. And it is a campaign to change the education system here in the UK to be focused around the climate crisis. And we ran this campaign called Teach the Teacher, which is, I think, both exactly and not at all what it sounds like. We went into our classrooms and taught our teachers and spoke to them about climate change, but not as teachers, not as a kind of hierarchical system, as allies, as a conversation, as starting the conversation that we really want to have. We want to start talking about climate change, and we want to help our educators to understand that issue, and we want to discuss it with them as allies and show them the ways that they can teach it that would benefit us the most. And it was, in our eyes, that campaign incredibly successful. It was ran in 45 schools across 20 countries around the world. And we had some great feedback from all the participating teachers. And we also just really want to say that it wouldn't have been possible without the US Embassy in London, who we have some representatives here today, and David Graham and the Paul Hamlin Foundation. So thank you so much to all of them for believing in us.
Yeah, and now we are bringing that campaign and those same conversations to you. Today, you're sitting in an audience with, as we've just heard from the Department for Education's Permanent Secretary, the Children's Commissioner, as well as with students and teachers from across the UK. And with that in mind, we are changing the conversation a little bit. We're going to talk to you about the who, what, when, where of climate change, the science and its impacts right now, its future impacts, as well as topics that we as young people are passionate about, climate justice, making sure the most affected people and areas are safe, and that nobody is left on their own, and how climate change is affecting our generation and many others' mental health. Now, don't worry if you've never heard of any of those things before. We're going to go through it all together so that everyone is on the same page. And that's why we're here. You might have seen scary headlines in the news. I know I have, especially leading up to COP26. And we want to make sure that everyone knows how to talk about those issues and that they understand what they mean and that they know how they can help. And maybe you haven't seen any headlines, maybe you haven't really thought about climate change as an issue before, and that's all right as well. We're here to keep you informed and make sure that you, as we want to be, as prepared for your future as possible, which is what we think that our education system should be doing.
And at the end, we're going to throw to some questions, so if any of you have any during the presentation, just keep them in your head and we'll throw to you right at the end. So why are we actually doing this? Well, why does Teach the Teacher exist as a project? lucky you, we're going to talk about that now. 4% of students, according to research that Teach the Future, that climate education in the UK campaign we were just talking about, 4% of students felt like they know a lot about climate change. 4% of a generation that are going to have to deal with the effects of this crisis and deal with solving this crisis. Only 4% of them feel like they know a lot about it. I think when I was growing up within the education system here in the UK, I didn't really know anything about climate change. I had climate change in my curriculum. I had it within the science that I did in the first half of my high school curriculum. I had it within the combined science GCSE, but I didn't have it. I didn't choose separate sciences. I didn't choose geography. So it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. It wasn't at the forefront of education, but it was at the forefront of the pages of newspapers. It was in the headlines, and it was terrifying to think that that would be my future. And I didn't have an outlet to talk about that. I didn't have a way to ask questions about it and to fully understand what this crisis was and what things like COP26 here in Glasgow are and what people are doing to solve it, what I can do to solve it, how I can contribute in my right now and in my future career, how I can contribute to the solutions with that. And what we really want to do here today is to help you to understand how we can start to have those conversations within schools.
Yeah, 100%. And the research that you were talking about a minute ago, to top that off, at the same time, Oxfam conducted similar research, but that actually found that 70% of teachers didn't feel adequately equipped to educate students on the climate crisis. So we, the students, we don't know, and it seems that some of the teachers don't know either, the ones who prepare us for our future. As students who have had to grow up in that education system that we don't think is preparing us for a future of climate change. We want to do something to help change that. And Teach the Teacher is helping to equip the teachers with those similar skills to help them start the climate conversation about what climate change is and how it affects us as young people, so that they will be able to feel more confident to bring it into that academic setting. It's a bit like teaching in reverse, as we've been through. It's maybe why so many people were interested in our campaign, because it hasn't been seen before. We can't do what young people our age have been doing. We've obviously been learning, but now we are teaching the teachers, teaching the people that are educating us. And Teach the Teacher is our way of doing something positive in an overwhelming situation. Now, students and teachers, maybe some of you feel that you are part of those statistics, and that's okay. It's not your fault at all. Climate education isn't down to you. It's not down to me or Phoebe either. But on an individual level, we can try and change that, and that's exactly why we're here today.
We want to make sure that everyone is on a track to receiving adequate training on the climate, whether that's students, whether that's teachers, and regardless of what they may or may not already know. And I think it's really important that this space now, this space here and in the classrooms, that's for continually learning together, continually learning for a crisis in the same way that we have with COVID, so that we can be all on the same page. So in true classroom form, as your teachers for today, let's do a little starter. So we want you to look at this number, 1.5 degrees Celsius, and think about whether you've heard it before, even in passing. So if you're in a classroom right now watching the live stream, you could even do a show of hands. Who has seen this number before?
Exactly. Well, what does that actually mean? The 1.5 degree statistic, made famous by the IPCC, that's the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and if you don't know who they are, they assess the science part of climate change and how good or bad the situation currently is. And they've been a big part of how we understand action on climate change. If we pass the 1.5 degree warming point, that's 1.5 degrees above global average, above pre-industrial temperatures, then the IPCC special report makes a scientific case that we will go past a critical tipping point, which is likely to cause irreversible impacts to life as we know it on Earth. With global warming of this number of 1.5 degrees, there will be increased risk to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth. And this 1.5 degree limit will be reached in 2034 if the warming trend continues in a similar way to what it has been up until December 2020. So really, it is a little bit of a worrying situation.
So now that everyone's in a little bit more of a climatey mood, or a bit of a terrified mood maybe, we're going to start by talking about the information that you may already know, but you may not know. And it's okay either way. It's okay if you know, and it's okay if you don't know. There's a lot of different but related terms about climate change. So you have climate crisis, climate change, ecological breakdown, global warming, global heating. So we're going to try and break them down. Whether or not we'll accomplish that is a different thing. Climate is the average pattern of weather conditions over a long period of time. So climate isn't weather. Weather changes daily, and the phrase that we've seen used before, and the phrases that we use, is that climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. So global heating and global warming is the increase in the Earth's average temperature over a long period of time. So global heating and global warming will change the climate on that large scale, which will affect the weather that we experience on a daily basis. So climate being the average pattern of weather over the long period of time, and weather being what we experience on that daily basis. As climate activists, we like to focus on and use the term climate crisis, and that's because climate change is something that we know that can happen naturally, but due to human activity, due to a lot of the things that we've been talking about, the IPCC special report, we know that now we are at a point of crisis when it comes to climate change. We are in a climate emergency. We're in a climate crisis, and the UK has declared a climate emergency, and that's going to be expanded on in the next couple of slides. And we're going to go on to look at how all of those terms link together, how we link together climate change, climate crisis, how we link together global heating, global warming to climate and weather, and how that impacts our lives here in the UK and everywhere else in the world. So let's talk a little bit about the causes of climate change. Well, the Earth has changed naturally for centuries. Human activities like burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and agriculture, they all contribute large amounts of greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, to the atmosphere, which enhances a natural greenhouse effect.
Yeah, and that human-induced kind of dangerous climate change, like Phoebe was talking about, the accelerated greenhouse effect, is due to those unnaturally high amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And those gases are the ones that would trap heat that might otherwise escape. So exactly like a greenhouse. And this has obviously dramatically increased recent rates of global heating, and it does lead to those large-scale shifts in weather, which we call climate change. Now, this graph on the screen here shows the correlation between CO2, carbon dioxide, and global warming. On the x-axis, you have the time there in years since 1880, and on each y-axis, you have obviously CO2 concentration and global temperature. So as you can see, in the past kind of 20 to 40 years, carbon dioxide concentration has dramatically increased, and consequently so has global temperature, that line there being the CO2 concentration. It's just some of the evidence amongst an abundance of other accepted data that human-induced and unnatural climate change does exist. So to me, to Phoebe, and to all of the people in our organisations, to many others around the world, the science of climate change is crystal clear.
So I mentioned fossil fuels just now, but there's often so many questions and misconceptions around what fossil fuels actually are. So we're going to try and talk about that really, really briefly. So fossil fuels, and I'm going to have to very heavily refer to my notes because I did not do separate sciences in school. Fossil fuels are made from decomposing plants and animals, like these fellas, hence the name. Organic matter builds up in layers and gets buried deep in crust, so that's like the outermost layer of the Earth. And over the course of millions of years, that matter is subject to heat and pressure, which converts it into high carbon and hydrogen store, and those are then called fossil fuels. So for example, more than 50% of a piece of coal's weight must be from fossilized plants. And you also have oil, which is a solid material between layers of sedimentary rock, and natural gas, which is found in pockets above those oil deposits. And natural gas is usually mostly methane.
And there are a couple of issues because extracting those fossil fuels is often very harmful. You might hear about how dangerous it is to drill for oil, both in terms of the ecosystem's cost with oil spills or fires, but in terms of the human cost, it's quite dangerous to work on an oil rig. And other ways of extraction, like hydraulic fracturing, it's also known as fracking, are detrimental. They can be detrimental to the environment. They might poison groundwater, poison surface water, cause air pollution and methane pollution, which we've just talked about worsening global heating. And there are some other issues too. One of those being that fossil fuels are a finite resource and they're not renewable. And it actually takes around 650 million years for those deposits of the fossil fuels to form. So really it's not sustainable to try and wait for more of them to be made. And the thing about those fossil fuels and why they're always talked about in climate negotiations like COP26 is because of all of those things that we've just talked about. They release the harmful gases when burned, and they make global heating worse. So the thing is that not only are we running out of those fuels, but using them is bad for the environment, and it actually exacerbates climate change.
So some people and some regions of the world, like us here in the UK, are not currently on the front lines. We're not currently experiencing the climate crisis, and we sometimes refer to that as climate privilege. We're not seeing this right now. However, we should also recognise that's likely only to be temporary, as we will all be experienced by the climate crisis at some point in our lives if we don't make significant changes to the ways that we exist on the planet. For a lot of people, climate change has been subtle. It doesn't look like famine, it doesn't like wildfires, droughts, it doesn't look like extreme weather events. It looks like reading about them. It looks like seeing the headlines on the news that I was talking about earlier. And because of that, I think a lot of people fall into the trap of believing that it doesn't exist, or believing that they don't have to do anything about it, or that somebody else will deal with it for them. Because like, we live in the UK, what's the big deal about a little extra heat? Like, we could probably use that, especially in Glasgow right now. But the thing is, a little extra heat and invisible climate change, it doesn't exist. I can guarantee you that at some point in your life, climate change has affected the way that you exist in this world. And its knock-on effects are going to continue to affect your life in the future, particularly if you're a young person.
Yeah. And the thing is that there are many examples of those large-scale shifts in weather, and they're impacting us today. I mean, if you've been looking at the news over the past year, you might have seen the California wildfires, the Australian wildfires, Texas freezing over, maybe Belgium flooding, seeing the cyclones in South Asia, maybe even the ocean catching fire in the Gulf of Mexico. And these are linked to things like rising sea levels and intense tropical storms. One thing that I know I've noticed is the increased frequency of rain, especially in summer, and definitely in England. That one sounds familiar to me. But the list goes on, really. And the thing is, these are only some of the recent events on the global news. And there are many, many more of these incidences happening every day, and especially in the global south, that don't really get the press coverage. And by global south, by the way, we generally mean countries that are outside of Europe and North America, the ones who are mostly low income in comparison to those countries, the ones in the global north. And they're the ones, for the most part, that are experiencing the front lines, the wildfires, the tropical storms, the floods. And we say that they are on the front lines of the crisis, yet they do have less economic capacity to respond to and to mitigate those extreme weather events and those impacts, especially through what most people are talking about at COP26, the tech fix, the science solution. And the thing is that the time lag, especially between the cause and effect in climate change, means that these weather shifts will continue to get worse into the future. And if we do nothing, climate change will begin to turn our world and our planet into something that does look more and more like a Hollywood disaster movie.
It already looks like a Hollywood disaster movie looking at these pictures. I mean, there are also real life impacts that aren't natural hazards too. As a 170% increase in flood risk, 5 billion people lacking sufficient water, no ice in the Arctic at least once every 10 years, which already affects global ocean circulation. Every half degree of warming will consistently lead to lower crop yield, it leads to lower nutritional content in tropical regions, all because of the climate crisis. And that's right now. Climate change impacts every single one of us. It impacts the food we eat, where and if we go on holiday. It impacts how much we spend, what we wear, who we vote for, how we view other people. And it's doing all of those things right now. The IPCC that we talked about earlier, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they said that taken as a whole, the range of published evidence indicates that the net damage costs of climate change are likely to be significant and to increase over time.
And the thing is that these costs probably aren't going to be paid by the big world leaders. They'll be paid by those on the front lines, like we just talked about, the front lines of climate change, by the marginalised communities that are disproportionately impacted every day, by those who have already had their homes taken from them, their livelihoods affected, maybe even their families have been injured or even died. And this really heavily links into something that we as climate activists, climate campaigners, call climate justice. And we'll talk a little bit about that now.
So you might have heard the term climate justice being thrown around before, but we're going to talk to you about what it actually means. So the impacts of climate change, as we've been talking about, they disproportionately affect different groups of people. So climate justice is the fair treatment of all people and the freedom from discrimination in the creation of policies and the creation of projects that address climate change, as well as the systems that cause the climate crisis and maintain that discrimination. So that's quite wordy, but essentially at its core, climate justice is social justice. And it's something that's increasingly incredibly important, not only to us as activists, but also to everybody, to young people and to adults in this world.
Now, this is an amazing quote. Mary Robinson, I'm actually reading her book now, it's very interesting. Climate justice links human rights and development to achieve a human-centred approach, safeguarding the rights of the most vulnerable and sharing the burdens and benefits of climate change equitably and fairly. And its resolution, equitably and fairly. However, the emphasis here should be on the vulnerability to the consequences of climate change. Due to power and maybe privilege, different groups of people have access to different resources and different amounts of financial capital to try and mitigate those impacts. We will all be affected by climate change, but some people, some groups of people in some areas will be affected sooner, will be affected worse, and they'll be impacted, they're being impacted now even. So to demonstrate this kind of disproportionate effect, especially on marginalised communities, this map shows cumulative carbon dioxide emissions, with the darker countries kind of emitting more overall carbon and the lighter ones emitting less. And as you can see, the global south countries release a proportion of emissions that is kind of smaller in comparison to others.
There's often this narrative around like carbon emissions and around the causes of climate change that focuses on individual carbon footprint and focuses on like population size. And that's such a misconception, because the idea of a carbon footprint was a campaign by the fossil fuel company BP in the 1980s, which aimed to draw attention away from the impact of big polluters and put the blame and the cause of the problem onto the individual. And this data, this graph highlights, is it a graph? Map? It highlights that climate change is not the fault of the individual. Climate change is actually mostly to do with wealth inequality. It's to do with wealth, economic ambition. That's a greater contributing factor than individual carbon emissions and individual carbon footprints. Climate change, in a lot of ways, we would argue, is the result of centuries worth of oppression of the global south, of these countries here that contribute much less in terms of carbon emissions, but are on the front lines of that climate crisis. And that is in the interest of implementing a high carbon, a resource depleting model, not of overpopulation or of individual carbon footprint.
Yeah. And the thing is that in every kind of scenario, you've got economic, environmental, social on the screen there. These communities, the ones that are marginalised on the front lines, they're the ones living with the impacts of climate change. And these maps all show the kind of disproportionate effects that those communities are having, whether that be kind of projected change in annual GDP. That's an up to 4% reduction. And you've got negative 50% change in agricultural productivity, and then increasing mortality impacts, increasing death rate there. And the thing is about climate justice is that it emphasises the importance of centering the discussion and working with and not for those at the forefront of the crisis. It ensures that it's a process of empowering and listening to and working with those communities, rather than imposing certain knowledge systems, certain ways of doing things on them.
So when we're thinking about climate justice, this is a great analogy, one that can be really, really useful. Same storm, different boats. The effects of climate breakdown, if left unchecked, they're going to affect everybody. They are, in a lot of ways, although we have problems with this quote, it would be the great equalizer. You know, they're going to affect every single person on this earth. Earth will become uninhabitable for most humans. At 4 degrees of warming, we'll be able to support less than half of the current global population. We're all in that same storm. We're all in this climate crisis. But our varying advantages, our varying experiences of like having the economic capital to be able to mitigate and to be able to adapt to those issues, and also centuries worth of oppression, those different privileges mean that we're facing the storm in different boats, with some groups able to avoid the worst effects because of their regional context, their regional context, their economic circumstances and their social standing, and some groups not being able to.
Yeah. Now, this is B. If you were in the Green Zone yesterday, you might have seen the My Climate Reality VR exhibition. She's one of the wonderful films that we had commissioned as part of that. She's also part of COP, which both me and Phoebe work for. And she's 25, she lives in the Philippines. And as part of the My Climate Reality exhibition, she told us about how climate change has affected life in her country, with the Philippines actually currently being one of the worst affected places in the world by the climate crisis. And in fact, climate-related hazards in the area are increasing in frequency and intensity. And actually the same number of tropical storms in the area occurring in the past 20 years, the same amount have occurred in the previous 15 decades, 150 years. And she says that climate change has affected our way of life as a nation. The school year has been moved to August compared to the original June because of the extreme rains, which aren't even typhoons. And they have brought in heavy flooding, which sometimes reaches the roofs of 2-story houses. And even those privileged and not directly affected by the flooding often suffer from something that she calls donations burnout due to the number of disaster responses needed, and that was especially last year. Livelihoods are still struggling to stay afloat given the back-to-back of the pandemic and multiple extreme weather events, and farmers are especially vulnerable. Now, there are 109.6 million people living in the Philippines today, and that's 109.6 million people living with a similar story to B's. And the thing is that that number is only going to grow, and the reality is that people living in the global south are going to have a similar story to B's, and they're going to be experiencing similar things every day.
For B, the way that she experiences the climate crisis is intrinsically linked with the way that she experiences this world living in the Philippines as a Filipino woman. So we're going to explore that a little bit further, this intricate web of identities and their connection to climate and social justice. So intersectionality, that big word there, and the term of Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined it, is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. So basically, it's the way that different parts of our identity, so being a woman and being queer, being black and being disabled, cross over with each other, and their effects are felt as a combined force. So it's the acknowledgement that everybody has their own unique experience of the world, of oppression, of discrimination. So what comes under intersectionality? So we have religious equality, racial justice, class justice, LGBTQIA+ justice, disability justice, gender equality, and of course a climate and social emergency, climate and social justice. Intersectionality is not just on that individual basis, it's also systemic, it's also institutional. It's part of everything within our lives, including environmental issues. And as we were saying earlier, discrimination felt by those marginalized groups, it puts them in a more vulnerable position when it comes to adapting to and experiencing the climate crisis.
Yeah, and because of that, because of everything that Phoebe's just said, climate justice is social justice. We can't get to a point where everyone is safe with all of their human rights being respected without tackling those issues that worsen the experiences and worsen how individuals experience 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, or even more extreme of that, 3 or 4 degrees. Without all of these things, we can't achieve climate justice, because as they are right now, these groups that we've mentioned, they will still be suffering disproportionately. Now, on to something a little bit different. Climate anxiety. Climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, climate distress, eco-angst, they're things that you may or may not have heard, but they all boil down to one thing, and that is that young people are increasingly aware that they are inheriting a future that will be significantly affected by the climate crisis and climate change. In 2019 alone, Oxford Language reported a 4,290% increase in the term eco-anxiety, which definitely highlights a growing interest in the mental health impacts related to climate change. In this year, in fact, a global survey found that nearly 60% of young people felt very or extremely worried about climate change, with over 45% of those same students saying that these feelings affected their daily lives.
And this is such an important discussion to be had in schools. It's not just the science of climate change, it's also how that's making students feel. Not because you want everybody to be upset or anxious or overwhelmed, but as an opening to understand how we might all feel, how scared and powerless and small, a drop of water in the ocean we might feel, and how we can change that towards positive action, and how we can help young people to feel empowered in the face of that. And I think my own feelings about climate change empowered me to become a climate activist, and others have become scientists or engineers or educationalists, teachers, and they've started to take decisions in their own personal lives. They've changed their diet, they've changed the way that they go about the world. And I think starting that discussion about how you could help, it helps to turn that anxiety into a kind of agency. Climate change demands a diverse range of solutions, just as diverse as the problem, and it needs a diverse range of skills and talents and passions to drive them. But we think that the current education system in many countries around the world, it promotes conformity, it promotes survival of the fittest style of atmosphere of competition. So it's not just what is being taught, but how we're teaching. that needs to change.
Exactly, and learning needs to empower students to go out into the world believing that they can create change. And as it stands, only a minority of students actually feel that that's the case. Us being here to discuss climate change with so many important educationalists and education leaders is a really great first step in achieving, our wider goal of comprehensive climate education. It signifies a really important moment in empowering young people to go out and create that change, so that in the same way that Phoebe and I are here today with Teach the Teacher, with Mock COP, with SOS, everyone watching now and at home, everyone that may feel they even want to take some action on the climate crisis, that those people do have the opportunity and the support to go out and do similar things.
I think it's only natural to feel anxious in the face of a drastically changing planet, in the face of a potential for a sixth mass extinction. Like that's gonna have some kind of emotional impact. The charity Global Action Planet released a report in 2020 that said 77% of students feel anxious when they think about climate change. But the thing about the climate crisis is that you can be overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem or fall in love with the creativity of the solutions. And we really think that you can do both. We really think, we work with an organisation called Force of Nature quite a lot, which is headed by a wonderful woman called Clover Hogan, who you'd all love. And they describe this as facilitating that shift from anxiety to agency. How the way to tackle climate change and climate anxiety are the same, to take action. And we're going to talk about how to do that in the coming slides.
A really important thing to understand about climate anxiety is that it is not only known to have that negative impact on mental health, but also that it can cause inactivity due to the overwhelming nature of the problem and the feeling that it might just be too big to contribute towards addressing it as an individual. Now, we need education to support students and learners to become those positive agents for change, to realise their potential, to make a real positive difference instead of having unchecked climate anxiety, causing that inaction and fear. And this is why we promote not just learning about climate change, but learning for the climate crisis, so that students can develop not just the knowledge, but also the understanding, the skills, and the confidence. The confidence is really important. Confidence is a major factor in turning that anxiety into meaningful action.
So in the same way that climate change affects now and will affect every area of our lives, we believe that climate education should be taught throughout every classroom. The students sitting in classrooms today are the workforces and the solution builders of the future. They are the future nurses, future civil servants, future teachers, future IT technicians. All of those people will have to deal with the effects of the climate crisis. Everyone is going to have to see these headlines. Everyone's going to have to feel those effects. So why are we not teaching that to everybody? Why are we keeping climate change to the separate sciences? Why are we keeping it to geography? And yes, some teachers, even whole schools, do way beyond the curriculum, way beyond the mandate on climate education. But that really depends on having a school leader or teachers or students that really, really care about it. And we don't think that it should be dependent on that. I didn't do, as I said, the separate sciences or geography in school. My experience was a single page in a textbook. And when I was younger, I was seeing all those headlines in the news and I was seeing the Paris Agreement being signed. I didn't understand what was happening. I saw the scariness. I didn't see the hope. And I think that's what we really need to give to students. I didn't have a place to ask questions. I didn't have a place to express how scared I was for myself, but not just for myself, but also my family. I have family in the global south, in the most affected areas. I was scared for them. I was scared for myself. I was scared for what my future would look like. And we need a place to express that. I think my education in the last couple of years didn't provide that, and we really want to help make sure that it does.
And the thing is that the climate crisis, as we've talked about, can be woven like a golden thread through many topics: psychology, history, economics, politics, citizenship. It needs to be taught in religious studies, in maths, in English literature. And at COP today, we can see religious representatives from across the world protecting their planet based on beliefs of loving thy neighbour and looking out for those suffering in the global south. We need to learn that, what religion looks like in practice, in the modern world, in the context of climate change. In history, we have to learn not to repeat our past. We have to learn how the climate crisis came about so that we, as the next generation, can look towards the future and towards those new solutions. We can look at the Industrial Revolution, which many would argue is the point that we started to enhance the natural greenhouse effect and to create that human-induced climate change. We can look at mass deforestation, the history of fossil fuel extraction. In psychology, obviously we've talked about climate anxiety, and we can study how that same anxiety, depression even, and other mental health issues affect our generation and how others experience the world.
And in politics, that's my degree subject. We can talk about how our changing world and how the economics and politics that surround it and have shaped to it, how that has changed, and how the theories for how we can use that to solve the crisis, and how I think as students and pupils don't understand what's happening here in Glasgow today. They don't understand what COP26 is. They don't understand multilateral organisations. They don't understand how the national government works. I didn't know what left or right of politics meant until I was in like year 9 of school, so I was probably about 14, 15, which I probably should have learned that earlier, which is probably on me, to be quite fair. But we need to understand how those systems work. We need to understand what the Paris Agreement is, what these international agreements are doing, whether they are binding, what different countries are doing, what the UK is doing. We need to know these things, and we need to think about how democracy and the challenges of implementing real change are happening. And students need to be learning that. We need to think about the uncomfortable outcomes and the needs for significant lifestyle changes at individual and at whole societal levels. And that's really similar for economics. There's a really strong argument that people should have to study different models for an economy and the challenges for the growth model and how growth model is like linked to climate change, how it isn't linked to climate change, and its impacts on like resource depletion and contributing to the climate crisis. And we believe that that could be made more mainstream.
Yeah. And in order to show students their potential to make a real difference, we need to show them the ways that it relates to them, their real life, their subjects, their future careers, that everyone, including the teachers that are watching right now, they can and must contribute to the solutions of that. Now, at a university level, there are increasing examples of sustainability being embedded in design disciplines, but this isn't across the board, and it also should also be happening in a secondary school education. For example, in university fashion design, it's increasingly acknowledging the negative impacts of fast fashion, like we talked about when we were talking about that graph on the board. And the negative impacts of that on the planet, and students are engaging with solutions to this. I've seen some really incredible degree fashion shows with recycled and sustainable materials. It looks amazing. And similarly to that, product design, students are being encouraged to consider product life cycles with the goal of progressing a circular economic model through progressive design approaches. We can vouch for the fact that students want to talk about climate education. We need to talk about climate. And that's why we're here today, to welcome those same conversations into the classroom and to say to everyone watching that it is time for us to start that climate conversation.
We recognise that for many of you that actually this might be quite an uncomfortable space, that like us, you might not have learnt about climate change, and you might feel concerned to talk about something. We've been talking about how big this issue is and how scary this issue is, and thinking about that you don't know, if you don't know all of the facts, if you don't know absolutely everything and a superhuman expert, that you should not be starting it, that you shouldn't be having that conversation or teaching about it. And teachers, I think you also have your own emotional landscape to navigate when you have those conversations. You have to mitigate your own fears and your own anxiety about your own children or your own futures. And that's difficult when you're trying to manage such powerful and big emotions. But the thing is, I don't think you need to feel burdened by the scale of the problem, by the enormity of the problem, because I think climate change isn't something necessarily to be taught in the black and white fashion. It's a crisis that we have to explore together. It's something in the same way that Teach the Teacher has been approached. We have to talk about as a conversation, as something between equals, between allies, and something that we need to explore as like together. And I think many young people are struggling to know where to go to talk about these feelings and to talk about climate change and to talk about the headlines that they're seeing everywhere, especially to do with COP26 and on the run-up to this. I think school is a place where we can have those conversations, and we just need to give young people and teachers that opportunity.
Yeah, and the thing is about that opportunity is that it is a scary situation, and for many people that can be hard to tackle. But the thing is that we need teachers to be brave, to allow those conversations to happen. Because the thing is that whether we like it or not, the climate crisis is going to affect us. It's going to affect our future. It's going to affect everything in our lives. And if school prepares us for that future, so climate change therefore needs to be a huge part of that education. Talking about the climate crisis in schools is a massive, massive opportunity to help practice the core skills that we're going to need to respond to the climate crisis, whether that be in our daily lives or challenges and opportunities in our career and our future. Skills like critical thinking, resilience, adaptability, systems thinking, global awareness, problem solving, all skills that can become regular features in things like daily discussions, in the wider pastoral curriculum, but also in individual academic teaching. Now, we talked earlier about intersectionality and the ways that the climate crisis links across people and places and communities. Climate change is social justice, but climate change is also emotional health and it's planetary regeneration, and understanding that social, emotional and environmental well-being are intricately linked to that helps us to understand why we can't separate those issues. We can't be well if the planet is sick. It's really that simple. But the thing is that we need to feel empowered and activated and mobilised to go and support the well-being of the planet and the people so that we help our own well-being.
So we think this week at COP, world leader after world leader has said that we need such a seismic shift to get to 1.5 degrees and to start healing the planet, to start dealing with this crisis in the implementation and the solutions instead of just the pledges and the promises. But I think, as Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. So to our fellow students watching, imagine how powerful it would be if your teachers taught you about climate change in an integrated way across all of your subjects, in a relevant way and in an empowering way. You and all of your fellow students would see how everything is connected, and you would begin to understand what role that you could play in tackling such an insurmountable, massive, terrifying problem. Recent research by the Brookings Institute showed that if only 16% of high school students in high and middle income countries were to receive good quality and empowering climate education, we could see a nearly 19 gigaton reduction of carbon dioxide by 2050. If only 16% of high school students in those high and middle income countries, a 19 gigaton reduction of carbon dioxide by 2050. That's massive. Comprehensive climate education is critical to net zero, and it always should be. It isn't just that we'd be saving energy now, that we'd be going vegan, that we'd be taking less flights or more public transport, whatever. It's that we can influence our country right now in the same way that me and Jodie are. We're not running the country yet, but our parents, our grandparents, the generation above us are. And I can't tell you how many leaders or delegates or people just running around at COP this week I've spoken to, and they've said, see me as a young person, and I've said, yeah, I'm here because my grandchildren told me to. I'm here because my grandchildren were getting on at me and they were scared. That's why adults are getting into this. We are the reason. Not to take any credit on that front, but young people care, and that means that older generations care. We have a lot of influence, not just within ourselves and within the power that we will take in the future and the power that we take right now, but also because we can influence change. And I think when we all get into that work, when we all get into our future, we can really see how quickly that will speed up. And when we become the workforce of the future, we need to make sure that we are a workforce for solutions, that we're a workforce for change, we're a workforce to deal with a crisis on the level of COVID and more. And I think we both think that good quality and integrated climate education it can be a secret weapon for the world in fighting climate change, and we just need to unleash it.
Exactly. So what now? You don't need to worry about being ready enough, or having to do your homework even. But today is the day to start having these conversations. Now is the time to begin that. This is a crisis for everyone to solve, for everyone to explore. So we need to do our part. And the best way to prepare young people, to prepare people like me and Phoebe, for the world beyond school is to explore that world as often as possible. But you don't need to take that on alone. We're here to do this with you, and to be honest, we'd really welcome the chance to do that with you, because we want to help our learning kickstart that preparation for climate change, preparation for a world that we're going to inherit. So thank you so much for listening to us and the things that we're worried about. It's nearly time to go out and start those climate conversations in the classroom. But until then, we're going to open the floor to questions. I think someone is going to come around with a mic. Yeah. Ooh, I see Sophie with the mic. Perfect, thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Haldis. I'm a teacher, and I have very much enjoyed being taught by you today. I'm not just a teacher, I'm also Deputy General Secretary of Education International. Oh, wow. And we represent 32 million educators around the world. And I'm very comfortable saying that everything that you have just taught me is in line with the manifesto that we have adopted and that teachers, 32 million of them around the world, back. We want climate change education for all children at all levels, age appropriate. We want it to be cross-cutting, transversal, that it trickles into all subjects. We want social justice to be part of it. And we want it to be conversational with the students. So we are your allies. Knock on the door wherever you are listening if you've not started talking to your teacher. One last point. Teachers need to be mandated to do this. Yeah. So it's not on an activist level. We need the politicians on board. Have you thought about teaching the politicians in addition to teaching the teachers? And then we could have even a broader ally group here, and perhaps if they had been taught by you, they would be pledging tomorrow to teach climate change education. Keep going, keep teaching.
I think that'll be amazing. I mean, if we can find some politicians that will be willing to be part of those conversations, that would be fantastic. And I mean, that's obviously the ideal. Those are the ones that are creating the policies. Those are the ones that, in so many ways, have the power in our society in the UK right now. So, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we completely agree with you.
Question. Actually, more to Jodie, because you're still at school, yes. And I wondered how that process of working with your teachers to look at how this is taught has been going, and whether that's something that you are engaged in doing together, and if there's kind of advice that you can give out for other students on how to work with their teachers to create an interesting lesson on these topics.
Yeah, and that's actually it's a great question, because my teachers thankfully are really supportive of this, especially my heads of school. I like St Edmund's College. I know you're out there, you're great. Specifically, they've actually asked me and a couple of the others to start working with them on a new kind of Year 8 curriculum. Well, not new, but like working on how we can integrate climate change into that Year 8 curriculum. And they're starting a panel, hopefully, which I'll be chairing as well, on sustainability, and that should hopefully be one of the first things. As for advice on how to start, talking to teachers, I would say just pick a teacher that you feel comfortable with, maybe someone that's really, you kind of have a feeling that they're gonna engage with you on climate change, because that's exactly what I did. It's how I got into the climate movement. And that has been then kind of got spread a little bit. Everyone started to know that the school wanted to talk about climate change. And then obviously now we're in that position to create that sustainability panel, because it's only grown. I would suggest just getting involved and start talking to your teachers. Say to them, I'm a little bit worried about climate change. I want to know more. Where do you think I can go? Is there a book that you recommend me to read? Is there an article? Is there a YouTube video? That's a really great place to start, just to start asking the questions.
Hi, Phoebe and Jodie. That's fantastic. Really brilliant lesson. It's always good when we get new knowledge, and it's such a high standard. I've got a question for you. I mean, I think you've got people listening to you that you can really impact on, and there's a level at which I think UK young people and children are able to get their voices heard. I wanted to ask your thoughts on those young people in some of those areas that are at the front line. You were talking about the global south. How do we help them, the young people there, get their voices heard? And is there a way we can do that? Or are there things you already know that are happening? Yeah. I thought you'd be the best people to ask, rather than us try and think about how to do that top down.
The one's incredibly plugged into all of these youth things that are going on. I think the best way that I have seen is treating them as allies, treating them as individuals, treating them as people with agency. So I think what happens so often, I think both in the way that we approach, I think when we as British people, as people that have English as a first language, we approach people who aren't that way, even implicitly, as if they know nothing, or as if they're stupid, even if that's like a small thing in the back of your brain. I think the way to approach it is to approach them as experts, to approach them as young people that have so many valuable things to say, not just in their experiences, but also like in their lived experiences, in the way that they experience the world and the things they see on a daily basis, but also because like they know things in the same way that me and Jodie know things. They know things in the same way that all of you do. They're experts in engineering, they're experts in science, they're experts in politics, they're experts in the way that their country is run, but they're not being given the opportunity to talk about that. Yeah. And I think when you start to treat young people as experts, when you start to treat young people as meaningful in voices to include in that room, I think that's what we see a lot is youth inclusion, but youth inclusion as in an advisory capacity rather than with power and rather than with like actual influence.
Yeah.
So I think when you start to include those young people, and I think if we were going to be the UK talking to young people in the global south, it would be providing them the resources and the avenues and the contacts to be able to then go into those spaces and be like, no, I disagree with you, and giving them the political capacity, giving them the ways to go into those rooms, the physical ways, and giving them the funding to be able to come to places like COP26, like to be able to get on the train, to be able to have the hotel accommodation or the homestay funding, you know, it's to be able to connect them with those resources and connect them with the skills and the capacity building to be able to get to the places where their expert knowledge and their experiences can be heard and listened to the most.
Yeah, because the thing is that they have immensely strong voices, and they're speaking up for themselves and for their communities. The problem comes to when they don't have the platform to do that elsewhere, and it's a case of places, especially Mock COP. What Mock COP was so keen to do was to amplify those voices and to give those voices a platform to speak on a wider level, on a global scale, which they might not be able to do. So giving them a platform and amplifying those voices is very important.
We aren't speaking for them, that we're allowing them, we're giving them the resources, the platform to be able to speak for themselves. Because otherwise we just continue that pattern of UK voice is most important, the English speaking voice is the most important one in the room, and that's not the case, especially when it's the climate crisis, when they are the ones that are experiencing it.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, I'm with the U.S. Embassy, and it's our great pleasure to be supporting you in this, because you're two very inspirational young people. And I have to say I'm very impressed with the way you structured your conversation, because you took this very complex issue, and I think you hit all of those points, from the psychology of youth to the science. And I think we can all rejoice in that you got to spend very little time on the question of whether or not it exists. Because for the most part, we've now reached the point where we no longer have to have that conversation,
Thankfully.
where we simply say, now we all agree that it exists, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And I'm also very inspired to know that you've been involved in the COP26, in the Green Zone, as you mentioned. And my question is, if you feel like the youth voice is being heard enough this year, in the major conversation that's taking place right here in Glasgow, or obviously, because we all need to learn from you, what more do we need to do to listen to the youth voice going forward? Thank you.
I mean, I have so many thoughts on this and so little time.
It's true.
I think the way that COP26 has been structured this year has been incredibly peppered by COVID-19, and it's been incredibly impacted by that. So I think a lot of young people don't have. So the way that COP26 is structured in terms of like passes is you have the green zone, public access zone, and you have the blue zone, which is like formal accreditation, like all of the fancy
policy people,
negotiation people, you know. But you can also be in that blue zone as an observer, as like me and Jodie are, where the NGO observers, where the charity people are going in to observe. And I think the way that you would include young people more meaningfully within those spaces is to not include them as observers, especially right now, because observers, because of COVID-19 and just because of the way COP26 is structured.
It's a lot of Zoom, there's a lot of video calls.
It's a lot of, during the World Leaders Summit, which was Monday and Tuesday of this week, we weren't allowed into the plenary rooms. We weren't allowed to see the negotiations. We had to go onto our phones and watch a live stream on our phones of what was happening like a couple of rooms down the hall. Like we could sit outside in the corridor but not actually go into the room. And I think that's case in point of how young people will be treated in those spaces. I think until we start including young people as the party badges, as the people that are allowed to, even in a small way, negotiate or talk to the negotiators, and until we start capacity building and teaching young people that will be in those spaces what that will be like and what it will look like and like how they should dress and what they should what they should bring and all of that kind of thing, like until we start not only including them and their voices and their expert voices in those spaces and making sure that they are not just like shouting on the sidelines, even on the inside of those rooms, being like observing and advising, and they're not just doing that, but they are part of that discussion and they're a part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
Because I'm on the board of a charity. I'm a trustee of a charity, and the way that we structured that is there is no point in having like trustee and youth trustee. There's no point in having like somebody that's on a lesser scale. There's no point in having somebody, especially in a youth facing charity that has less power. We all need to be included as trustees and just trained to be able to work on the same level, because otherwise we're just going to be shouting at the people and they're going to be like our loudspeaker. In the same way that we just said, there's no point in adults speaking for us. We can speak for ourselves. We just need to be given the platform to do that. We need to be given that trustee role. We need to be given that party badge. We need to be given the delegate role, because otherwise we're just going to have a watered down version of whatever we have to say. And I think, the UN Secretary General met with Greta Thunberg, met with Vanessa Nakate, met with Nikki Becker, a lot of people who are amazing, a lot of amazing young people, but they are still not included at the negotiating table. They are still in those little advisory meetings in the back room, you know. They are the photo opportunity, they are the tick box of representation. And I think that is what we kind of had to do for COP26 this year because of COVID-19, and I think the UK has done an incredible thing in managing COVID-19 lives, and imagine COVID-19 managing COP26, because we ran COP26 and we were talking on the train on the way here that we cannot imagine what it was like to run COP26 this year. That must have been a mammoth task, and I genuinely can't fathom it. But there were so many ways that young people could have been included.
Yeah. And
we really want to work towards that at COP27.
Seen some very unfortunate pictures of this global youth statement that was produced by some amazing campaigners and activists. They gave them to delegates, and then the pictures showed the statement kind of like on the floor in the bin, which unfortunate. But this is the kind of thing that does kind of happen to young people quite a lot, and young people's voices are squashed quite a lot. But yeah, like Phoebe said, giving us the platform to be able to speak and giving us a real meaningful seat at the table is incredibly important in decision making.
Jodie and Phoebe, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Really enjoyed it. If I gave you a magic wand, because here we are at COP26, and I gave you a magic wand, what would you want the outcome of COP26 to be?
Oh, wow.
Oh, I could give you an itemised list. I mean, first and foremost, obviously, do you want to talk first? Or
no, please go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
I will carry on. I've been at COP26 for a while, so I'm very much in policy headspace.
You're in policy mode.
The Paris Agreement is not binding, and I don't know if it ever could be, but if I had that magic wand, the Paris Agreement would be binding not only to 2 degrees, but to 1.5 degrees. Yeah. And that means coal phase out, that means fossil fuel phase out, that means...
all the things that politicians don't want to hear, basically.
Yeah, that means no Cambo oil field, that means no new oil and gas, that means meaningful commitments and sticking to them with solutions, and immediately, rather than in a couple of years' time. But diplomatically, whether that's possible, who knows? But that's what I would do. But that's very much magic wand. What I would also say is meaningful civil society representation. I would have young people with party badges. I would have young people there at the negotiating table and with the structured training to be able to participate meaningfully within that conversation, and have young people. I was talking to someone the other day who is on the youth advisory board of the UN, and he's sleeping in a room of, I think he's one of 4 people sleeping in a room. I also know people who they have about 30 people sleeping on the floor of a church in sleeping bags. And that's the level of accommodation that young people have here, even observers, even people that are inside of those spaces, never mind the people that are on the outside, in the green zone, in the little civil society areas. You know, young people haven't been given the funding and haven't been given the resources to be able to participate in this conversation. And I think if I had that magic wand, if I had a magic money tree, I would be giving young people those resources, and I would be giving civil society those resources, and I would be putting young people into the room with Alok Sharma, with Antonio Guterres, with all of the people with the power, and I'd be making sure that those people could listen. But again, magic wand.
Hi both. You did excellent, and I think you should consider a career in teaching in the future.
My mum would love that. She's a teacher.
A little plug from the Department of Education there. But my question kind of follows on from Mike's, but more on the everyday consumer behaviour type thing. So in the last 5 to 6 years, we've had a big media push about the plastics pollution and about sustainable fashion, and people now are making really good everyday choices around those 2 issues. But from a young perspective, are there any other everyday things that people do that are really alarming, and you think we need to change those immediately?
I think just the amount of people who specifically in young people. It surprises me when young people aren't really that bothered about climate change, and they're not bothered about, you know, changing their lifestyle. They don't like the idea of being vegan. They love fast fashion. And the thing is that creating shifts that are specifically aimed at young people and creating campaigns that are specifically aimed at young people and kind of the cool Gen Z aspect of that would be so useful in trying to shift young people's mindset in terms of climate change, because there are so many incredible young people that I've met that are integral to the climate movement, but equally there are people that I know and people that I've seen that aren't interested in that. And the thing is that young people obviously are growing up to be the future adults and the future voters and the future leaders of tomorrow. That's such a classic phrase. But that young people are the ones that need their mindset changing now. I feel like there's so many adults, so many incredible adults at COP26 that are pushing for like-minded adults to change their lifestyles, to take public transport, but I haven't really seen the same thing in young people. So
yeah, I mean, if I could speak very much as a politics student, I think what worries me is the amount of young people. I'm 20, so I don't know a lot of people who are 18 and over who didn't vote in the last election. I know a lot of young people who, the common phrase is, I don't think I know enough to be able to make a meaningful decision, so I'm just not going to make one. I think that's something that worries me quite a lot, is if that is the mindset that we have when it comes to politics, not engaging with it, or the mindset that we have, like, we weren't taught enough in school about politics to be able to like fully like engage with that process. I think that worries me a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's individual or systemic. I think the lack of political engagement is something that really concerns me, because I mean, as you say, policy is what is going to shape how the solutions to this crisis. Yeah. It's not just teachers, it's politicians who are going to have to deal with this. So we need to make sure that the politicians that we have are politicians that fully represent us, and we need to make sure that our democracy is remaining upstanding, because if we have young people that are completely disengaged with politics, where are we at with democracy, you know?
Yeah. Oh.
Awesome presentation, guys. Just a question. So you must know that tomorrow, or is it later today, the Department for Education are launching their climate and sustainability strategy. What do you want to see in it? What are you excited about? Because it's a new thing. What do you want to see?
Well, many things. But I mean, primarily, I think having mum as a teacher, I think I want to see a professional teaching qualification about climate change. Absolutely. I want to make sure that teachers are being trained properly and are given the capacity to be able to do that, because I know from growing up with my mum that she is very overstretched in what she's doing. Teachers across the country are, and I would want to see something that isn't just tacked on to the end. It's something that's integrated throughout. It's something that's mandatory. It's something that's assessed. It's something that's woven like a golden thread through the entire education system. Anything you'd add?
Yeah, and I definitely want to see young people being included in the new kind of climate curriculum. I want young people to have that say in what they want to learn and the things that they want their teachers to be taught. Teach the teacher, I love that. Yeah, but just young people having that input, because obviously it's our education, it will be future young people's education, and having young people at the forefront of developing a climate change strategy, I think is very, very important in that. Perfect.
Any final questions?
Amazing. I think we are now handing over to the lovely Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza.
Thank you so
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So my name's Rachel D'Souza. Hi, my name's Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England, and my job is to listen to the voices of young people and amplify them. So it's great to be here and a real privilege. COP's been amazing. So first I want to thank Phoebe and Jodie. That was, I mean, brilliant lesson. The best lessons for me have new knowledge, are a really high standard, take me somewhere I haven't been before. But also, wasn't it their enthusiasm and commitment? Their best teachers are the ones who love their subjects, and that was really, really special. So thank you to both for that. So why am I so interested? Well, I've just done a survey of England's children. We've just had over 500,000 responses, listening to children and their concerns. And I can tell you that one of the biggest concerns for our children is the future of the environment. 39% of them put that as their main issue. It was in the top 2 issues. It was also something that they really wanted for their life going forward as well, something very important to them. So if it's my job then to listen to that, and the one thing I'd want to tell Jodie and Phoebe and everyone listening is, I can tell you that I have spoken to the Department for Education. We've got the Permanent Secretary here today, Director Generals, others. They are listening. Look at this classroom we're standing in. I mean, Mike Green over here and his team have developed a proper eco classroom that actually children would love to be in and young people would love to be in. Everyone, I think, really are trying to listen. I spoke to Alok Sharma. I shared his view, this view of young people before COP, and he committed to me, and I hope so for Phoebe and Jodie who wanted this, he committed to me that he would take these views of young people to every government, every business, every world leader he spoke to. So please do know you are being listened to, and that's the start, and we must listen more. So COP26, what have we seen? I've been so excited to see the solution-focused approach of COP26. And one of the key ways that's happened has been the involvement of young people. So yesterday, I was able to hear multiple ideas from 260 of Glasgow's children about how we can make the environment around them and the environment better and try to solve things. And there's a clue in that. One of the things I was thinking about yesterday was how much more creative, I'm sorry adults, how much more creative children's brains are than adults' brains. We kind of have educated ourselves out of it. And the solutions that were coming out of those young people, I mean, from Venetia, one of the Young Earthshot Prize finalists, who'd actually looked around in her home in South India and seen how fossil fuels were being used for ironing and developed a solar-powered model to actually do something about it. I mean, the multiple solutions to making the environment better coming from young people are amazing. And if I had a request, thinking about climate strategy and climate education with children would be finding a way to unleash that creativity, because that's where the solutions are going to come from. And I am, as an ex-head teacher, also going to say science, maths, STEM education, because that's where our environmental scientists, our creators and our inventors are going to come from. So few thoughts there from me. So, I would say young people, keep going, keep teaching the teachers. I think you're incredibly powerful in teaching your teachers, teaching your parents, teaching your grandparents, your carers. Yes, like Phoebe and Jodie said, be political. Write to your MPs. Make sure we're talking to ministers about this. And all around the world, I would say the global thing is important too. Let's connect with young people right across the world and try and make a difference everywhere. I think that's really strong. So adults, what can we do? So we know how passionate young people are. I would say we have to keep listening. We have to keep using, I've already praised Mike for his eco classroom. All of us can be thinking about how in our work we can improve the environment. But most importantly, and the lesson of today for me is, let's listen to the young people, let's learn from them, let's get them around the table, not just at COP26, but for the days and weeks and months to come, and that's how we'll move our environmental issues on. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Great to meet everyone.